for fools gladly, has worked in some of the toughest jobs, worked with some of the toughest people. I suspect that he will say, knowing him, exactly what is on his mind. But let's look at some of the practicalities for the president here. He was turned down by a retired admiral, a currently serving active duty, someone who's still on the job in the military, cannot say no to the president. So, you know, it may be that President Trump and the White House decided to look at somebody on active duty knowing that they couldn't decline, that they couldn't say no. But with H.R. Mcmaster, you're getting somebody pretty interesting because he's just not known as someone who's going to be anybody's yes man. What he can bring to the table at the NSC is probably the much needed internal management to get the NSC fully up and running, to get things coordinated, to get items to the president for decision making on a quick basis. As a lieutenant general, as a 3-star, he knows how to do all of that. He knows how to get the right people in. He has a pretty good depth and breadth across the military. He will be able to assemble people that he wants, that he's known for years and trusts. He's also somebody, and I don't think it should be regarded lightly, someone who's a great military thinker and a bit of a historian. He wrote a PhD thesis and book called Dereliction of Duty about the failures of command, the failures of government back during the Vietnam War, something that was very widely read and still is today inside the military, Brooke.
So you're talking about Lieutenant General H.R. Mcmaster. So if we're looking at this picture here, he is on our left, Trump's right, and on the other side, Barbara, that is General Keith Kellogg. He will be the NSC Chief of Staff. That was a name potentially floated as the National Security Advisor. Tell us more about him.
General Kellogg retired for many years, a very decent guy by all accounts. He wanted to come back into government service after being out of it for many years. He had been involved in the early days of the operations in Iraq, not in a battlefield sense. He was involved in some of the sort of reconstruction, the getting the whole Iraq enterprise up and running in a non-combat sense. As I recall, by that time he was a civilian. He is former Special Forces. He served in a variety of highly respected jobs, highly decorated, many years ago back in Europe. I want to tell a sort of personal, professional anecdote about General Kellogg because he and I have spoken about this so often. On the morning of 9/11 here inside the Pentagon, he was active duty. He was a 3-star at the time. And I ran into him suddenly coming out of the National Command Center. He was the first person that morning to tell me face to face, he was quite ashen-faced, that it was a terror attack, and then he went off down the hallway to deal with everything that needed to be dealt with. So he's someone that has, you know, certainly seen a lot in his years in the military, but hasn't served during this whole era of ISIS and the sort of post-9/11 terror atmosphere.
Sure. Barbara, your knowledge is invaluable. If you want to stick around, great. I may need to come back to you. Let me bring in a couple more voices. I've got David Chalian, our CNN, Stephen Yates, former Deputy Assistant for National Security to Vice President Dick Cheney. Lynn Sweet is with us, Washington Bureau Chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, and Colonel Cedric Layton, CNN military analyst. So let's go. We've heard sort of the military experience. David Chalian, just on the politics of all of this. You know, we know it's been I think it's fair to say a rocky path to finally land on this person to be the national security advisor. And on a holiday, I mean, now this is huge, huge news, and now he's named this person and the NSA Chief of Staff. Your thoughts?
Well, remember, first and foremost, that this is not a Senate confirmable kind of position. So this is Donald Trump with a gut check here of somebody that he can really trust in a position that, as you note, has been troublesome, you know, has been trouble for him since the Mike Flynn situation. I will say, Brooke, you know, for a White House that has been complaining about leaks of all sorts, personnel and other intelligence matters, but this was a bit of a surprise, right? It wasn't clear as to what the spray was to get a photo op, that the press pool was being brought into President Trump, and this meeting he had was not something that was advised or that we knew what would come out of this. So he was able to control this entirely on his terms, the Mar-a-Lago backdrop, having these two military men on either side of him. This was a completely sort of President Trump produced event in that way, and it has the value of surprise that will help dominate the remainder of the news cycle.
Colonel, do you know either of these gentlemen?
I do. I do know General Mcmaster a bit, and he is absolutely, without a doubt, as Barbara Starr reported, one of the most brilliant minds in the U.S. military today. It was a very wise choice on the part of President Trump to do this. He has a lot of potential. He is, I would say, this generation's version, perhaps, of either a Brent Scowcroft or a Colin Powell, both of them, of course, previous national security advisors. So this is a very good pick for the national security community.
Okay, and then what about just in terms of the timing? Lynn Sweet, you agree with David Chalian in saying, you know, for White House complaining of leaks, that this was sort of a surprise how they handled this?
I think, no, I'm not surprised, and I don't mean to disagree, David, with you so much. We knew that these gentlemen were in play, and we know that Trump likes to make announcements in the way he does, and these guys on the couch. Here's what I think is interesting. One, he said, so there doesn't have to be a leak, that runner-up John Bolton is going to get another position. I don't know what it will be, but we know he's in play. But what is interesting here is that however we got to this point with Flynn out, that this appointment is probably more helpful to the Trump White House overall than having Flynn there. Because if Mcmaster has the same level of trust with President Trump that Flynn had, Flynn was a controversial character even without the controversy that led to his ouster. Flynn had dealt in conspiracy theories and trafficked in them. Led political charges during the convention and in other speeches. He gets a second chance, and in this redo, it's probably a better choice all around, because this is somebody who comes in with no extra baggage at a time where the Trump administration just needs to get to work.
Stephen Yates, you advise Vice President Cheney. I mean, how can Lieutenant General McMaster be so successful in a way that perhaps General Flynn and his baggage, couldn't be?
Well, number one, he doesn't come in with any of those kinds of rumors, innuendos, or actual events in the past that get in the way. President Trump has proven that he has a very strong preference for having military advisors filling these kinds of roles. The NSC is not really a military organ. Certainly military-related affairs come there for discussion and decision, but you can have anyone ranging from a professor to a business person to a retired or current military person serving. But President Trump has clearly gone the military route. He seems to also want this to serve as a coordinating and facilitating entity, with giving great deference to his very powerful Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense cabinet members. And so we're in a little bit different territory in terms of role of NSC and National Security Advisor than we have in the last several administrations.
Colonel, what about, when we think of challenges, and, this is a different sort of National Security Council in the sense that you have this political operative by the name of Steve Bannon, who actually who's a principal, who has a seat at the table. So that's unprecedented. We do know Sarah Huckabee Sanders did say that this, the NSA chief would be able to pick the team, which is key. What's challenge number one for the general moving forward?
Well, Brooke, I think it could be multiple challenges, but I would say North Korea would be at the top of the list, and that would be a bit of a challenge for General McMaster because he hasn't really spent a lot of time in the Asia-Pacific theater, at least not recently. So that will be a big challenge, and also, of course, the fight against ISIS. With today's offensive against Mosul, I think that that has to be also at the top of the list, and they're going to have to juggle their priorities between those two possible theaters that we're dealing with right now.
David Chalian, just final thoughts from you on now that we have these two names. What now?
Well, as you were just discussing, we are going to see, does this National Security Council run differently than we've seen in White Houses past? And I just want to follow up on Lynn's point. It's not just the National Security Advisor now where he had a false start and went back and now appointed someone who, at this initial moment, is getting rave reviews and perhaps may be a stronger choice. That may be true for his Labor Secretary nominee after Puzder was not able to get through, and the new Labor Secretary nominee may be more appreciated now. And on a non-personnel matter, perhaps we're going to see that with the executive order as well, whereas it was a botched rollout initially on the travel ban, but now maybe going back, as the president said, to tailor it to the courts. Perhaps President Trump is finding, sort of when he hits a road bump, that he is able to get back on course and actually proceed down a better path.
Thank you all so much. And again, the breaking news here, we just saw the picture. We thought it'd be some sort of pool spray. Didn't realize it would be this, that it would be the president naming on his right, our left, the next National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. Mcmaster, who Barbara Starr, really perfectly painted as such experience, Iraq and Afghanistan, independent thinker. And then on the other side, you have General Keith Kellogg, who will be the NSC Chief of Staff. That happening just now there from West Palm Beach, Florida.